Hi and welcome to this video on GCSE Mathematics Making a Difference. In this video we're going to focus on some of the key performance differentiators between grade 6 to grade 7. So I thought it'd just be useful to start off by looking at some general themes for performance across the whole papers. So on screen here you can see colour-coded the average performance on each question for students working at each grade, and it follows the general kind of distribution we'd expect to see with that kind of diagonal pattern there, with a few little exceptions where we've got a question that maybe has performed particularly poorly, has been more challenging for the whole cohort. So for example, question 9b here. And likewise, vice versa, question 11D looking like it was a little bit easier than expected for the whole cohort. So in terms of our themes for grade 7 students, what we see is that they're typically getting full marks on most or all of the crossover questions. Their performance by question is above the whole cohort average throughout the paper. And they drop to, on average, below half marks only in that final third of the paper. And they consistently will score marks even in the hardest questions at the end of the paper. What we're now going to dive into is where are the biggest gaps between grade 7 performance at grade 7 and performance at grade 6, looking at individual questions, and we look at this across all the June series and all papers and start to see, are there any themes that come out of that, any topics in particular that stand out, that consistently we see improved performance at grade 7 than we do at grade 6. Okay, so we've summarised the result of that analysis on this slide here. So this is a summary of just themes of where we see consistently students at grade 7 being a lot more successful in these topics than their grade 6 counterparts. So a good indication of some areas where your students targeting grade 7 could experience success in and would be useful to target. Where we generally see those big gaps occurring is generally in the questions that are in the kind of the late teens, early 20s in terms of the position within the paper, and it's heavily weighted towards those algebra and geometry topic areas. Within algebra, functions keeps cropping up again and again and again, so especially inverse functions and that harder work with working out an algebraic expression for the composite function. The factorising of non-monic quadratics, so these are harder quadratics where the coefficient of x squared is greater than 1. This is a little bit of a barrier for grade 6, they're struggling with that, but grade 7 students should be working much more successfully with those. In terms of geometry, now these are the kind of generally the big mark questions. We're talking the 4 or 5 mark questions, and with sine and cosine rule and the half a b sine c, quite often these are questions where maybe we need to apply one or more of those rules, or it's a little bit trickier. It's maybe using the sine rule to calculate the third angle within a triangle. And the arcs and sectors questions, when we looked at those, they generally often included some triangle work also. So they were, the arc and sector work was part of a more complex geometrical diagram. So they were having to bring knowledge and skills from different areas to play in the same problem there. With the vector work, what our grade 7 students were doing a lot better than grade 6 is being able to express a vector in terms of some given unit vectors, but they're still maybe only getting about halfway into the vector questions. Those were very much more a discriminator of your grade 8, grade 9 performance. And then just lastly to say, obviously on the probability questions, it's those ones that involve some algebraic work, algebraic probability, that were really the key differentiator between performance at grade 7 compared to grade 6. So on screen here, just a couple of examples of questions that we saw some big performance differences on. On the right hand side, yes, we've got that algebraic fraction, but in the denominator there, we've got that non-monic quadratic that presents some problems for students working below grade 7, but our grade 7 students should hopefully be able to successfully factorise those more difficult quadratics. So in terms of resources, we've got our theme practice papers, which are just practice papers themed by topic. And on screen there, you can see from the analysis that we've done some key topics to support progress of students working towards that grade 7. At this stage, I'd also really like to just mention calculator use. So obviously we expect our grade 7 students to be using their calculators really fluently and efficiently, but I think it's really worth a focus on incorporating checking routines with their calculators into all practice in all lessons, so that you can establish those really good calculator skills and that routine checking of their solutions. Because quite often this is where we see students working at those higher grades is just losing silly marks because they haven't checked things. So if we can establish that successfully, making sure they're using the calculators to do that, that is going to make sure that they maximize the marks that they can get. So we're talking about, substituting their values back into an equation to check a solution. They can use the table function to check, for example, the nth term of a quadratic sequence. And when they've worked out a fraction for a recurring decimal question, well, then put that fraction back into your calculator and convert it to a decimal to check that you've actually got the correct one. And also check that that fraction is fully simplified as well. We have our aiming for grade 7 practice papers. So there are 4 sets for this grade. Sets 1 to 3 are full-size papers, so they're an hour and 30 minutes each. And set 4 are shorter 35-minute tests with student-friendly mark schemes. So these are really perfect to do a mark in one lesson. Another resource that I really want to highlight, is one of my favourites, are the exemplar materials. So these are PowerPoints that have got a selection of questions from previous series, where it's got the question, the mark schemes, examiner commentary on how that question performed, common misconceptions, etc. Along with some exemplar student responses, so actual student responses taken from real life exam scripts, and then how these were marked and why. So these are actually fantastic to use with students in class to help them to understand how the marks are allocated, and in turn to develop a better understanding of how multi-step problems are broken down. So a really good way to use these in class is to kind of first of all show them that blank question and get them to have a go, or you might be using this as a follow-up to their mock exam scripts. Get them then to predict what they think the marks are going to be for. So it's a 3-mark question. What do we think the mark scheme is going to look like? We're then going to mark the question using the mark scheme. And if they didn't get full marks, get them to explain why. They need to articulate, well, what was it that they needed to do differently? Discuss the examiner notes with the class. So bring those key messages out, examine them and discuss them. So then you can show them the student exemplars and get them to have a go at becoming the examiner themselves. So maybe get them working in groups together to mark each response, and then presenting to the rest of the class about what marks they've awarded for a particular response and why. And what I always like as a great follow-up to this activity is to get the students then to attempt the equivalent question from the shadow papers. So this really helps to consolidate that learning and see if they can put into practice what they've learned through that deeper analysis of the mark scheme and analysing other students' work. Now, for any student that's working towards grade 7 and above, I would highly recommend that you take a look at our extended maths certificate resources that are there to support that new qualification, because these are just a fantastic bank of questions, resources, exercises, topic tests that are really going to stretch and challenge your highest attaining students and help them to develop that much deeper understanding and get much more practice of those really more difficult problem solving questions that enable them to access some of those marks towards those more challenging questions at the end of the exam. So the extended maths certificate, there's a textbook available for that, which is absolutely fab. So just grabbing one of those for your classroom as a source of extension materials. Take a look at the sample assessment materials and just have a go at doing some of the questions yourself. They're great fun, and there'll be a wealth of questions within there that you immediately want to start incorporating into your lessons. And we've got our teaching and learning materials that have got kind of work solutions for all those sample assessments. We've got schemes of work where EMC is built into the GCSE scheme of work, so you can see how you can naturally just build that into lessons, your normal GCSE lessons, to extend students. And of course, all of that is on the Maths Emporium as well, along with some additional topic tests, which we'll see on the next slide. So we've got some EMC topic practice papers. Each of these has walkthrough videos as well and a little QR code, so great to set for independent study as well. And some key topics from that bank of resources that I'd recommend for grade 7 GCSE would be the quadratics, the function work, Pythagoras and trig, and the probability questions. So they're going to really give your students lots of practice in those most difficult AO3 problem solving questions and just really strengthen and deepen their understanding of those key topics. This video is part of your subject advisor support from Pearson. I'm Vicky, I'm subject advisor for maths and statistics, and you can get in touch with me all the ways that you can see on screen.